Hello, dear friends. Settle in with a cup of tea and join me for a serene journey along the Silk Road. Today's cozy story follows a caravan carrying silk through deserts and mountains, filled with wisdom, warmth, and adventure. If you enjoy it, please like, subscribe, and comment when you're watching. Morning, afternoon, or evening. Your likes and comments mean so much to me. Imagine a warm summer evening in the heart of ancient China, during the Han Dynasty, when the sun dips slowly below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and pink, as if an artist's brush has left a final stroke on the canvas of the day. The air carries the scent of jasmine blooming in the imperial gardens, mingling with the faint smoke of sandalwood burning in incense holders. From a distance, the gentle trickle of fountains, mimicking mountain streams, blends with the hushed voices of courtiers whispering in the shadows of grand palaces. It was the year 138 BCE, and in the capital city of Chong'an, where the walls of the imperial palace stood like silent sentinels, life flowed in its measured rhythm. But on that evening something was about to shift, something small, like a silkworm's cocoon falling to the earth, destined to grow into a mighty tree. In a quiet corner of the palace, far from the opulent halls where Emperor Wu Di held his councils, lived a young servant named Li Wei. Barely past 20, his days were filled with an endless string of duties, polishing bronze lamps, serving tea brewed from mountain herbs, and ensuring the silk carpets in the chambers lay perfectly smooth. Li Wei hailed from a humble peasant family in the Yellow River Valley, where the soil was fertile but life was harsh. His father, an old farmer, used to say, "My son, the world is vast, but your place in it is like a drop in a river. Don't try to change the current, for it will sweep you away." Yet Li Wei, with his curious eyes the color of dark jade, could not settle for such a fate. He dreamed of distant lands, stories of which he'd heard from wandering merchants who occasionally visited the palace with caravans of spices and jewels. That evening, Li Wei was tending to his tasks in the imperial library, a vast hall filled with bamboo scrolls, where the air smelled of aged papyrus and ink made from pine soot. He was carefully arranging the scrolls when he heard footsteps. It was Zhong Qian, an imperial envoy, a man in his middle years with a face weathered by the winds of the desert. Zhong Qian was no ordinary man. He had served in the military, fought in battles against the Xiongnu, the fierce nomads from the northern steppes who struck fear into the empire's borders. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, seemed to hold the secrets of the grasslands, and his neatly trimmed beard spoke of a warrior's discipline. He entered quietly, but with the confidence of a man who knew his purpose. "Boy," he said to Li Wei, "bring me a fresh lamp. Tonight will be a long one." Li Wei nodded and swiftly lit a new lamp filled with sesame oil. The flame danced, casting warm reflections on the walls adorned with frescoes of dragons and phoenixes, symbols of imperial power. Zhong Qian unrolled a scroll, revealing a map, lines tracing mountains, rivers, and unknown lands to the west. Li Wei, unable to contain his curiosity, peeked over the envoy's shoulder. "What is this, sir?" he whispered. "Lands beyond the mountains?" Zhong Qian smiled, his voice low and steady, like the murmur of a river at night. "This is the world beyond the Middle Kingdom, lad. Emperor Wu Di, our wise ruler, dreams of alliances with the peoples who live where the sun sets. The Xiongnu, our enemies, rule the steppes, but beyond them lie kingdoms where men ride horses taller than ours, and where herbs grow that can heal any wound. I am to journey there, find a path, and return with allies." Zhong Qian's words struck Li Wei like a cool breeze after a sweltering day. He imagined those lands, endless deserts where the sand whispered secrets, towering mountains capped with eternal snow, and peoples with strange faces speaking tongues unknown. In the palace, rumors had swirled about the emperor's ambitions. Wu Di, a ruler driven to expand the empire, dreamed of eternal glory. He had already introduced new ways of waging war. His engineers crafted crossbows with bronze mechanisms that shot farther and truer, while alchemists sought elixirs of immortality in blends of mercury and herbs. But this mission of Zhong Qian's was something different. Not war, but discovery. Li Wei felt his heart quicken. "But sir," he asked, "how will you find the way? The Xiongnu won't let you pass their lands. They're cruel, like wolves in a pack." Zhong Qian sighed, his face creasing into a faint smile. "True, lad. They captured me once, held me for 10 years. I married one of their women, had children, but my heart remained with the empire. I escaped and returned. Now the emperor trusts me again. This time I'll take a caravan, camels laden with silk, our greatest treasure. Silk, soft as a lover's touch and strong as the emperor's will. We'll trade it for knowledge and allies. Silk, the very essence of China's uniqueness." Li Wei knew this from childhood. In his village, women fed silkworms with mulberry leaves that smelled of fresh rain. They gathered cocoons, boiled them in steaming water that bubbled softly like a whisper, and unraveled threads as fine and lustrous as moonlight. Silk was a secret China guarded jealously. No one beyond the empire knew how to produce it. It was a symbol of luxury. Imperial robes shimmered in every color of the rainbow, and court ladies wore dresses that rustled like leaves in the wind. Now, this silk was to become the key to a new world. As Zhong Qian spoke, Li Wei envisioned the preparations. In the palace stables, camels, tall and humped, chewed dry grass, their hooves clattering on the stone floor. The air there smelled of hay and animal sweat, mixed with the aroma of spices packed into sacks, cinnamon that stung the tongue and ginger that warmed the body on cold nights. Commanders inspected weapons, swords of tempered steel that rang when struck, and shields of lacquered wood. And in the imperial hall, Wu Di sat on a throne of carved jade, his stern yet wise face lit by candles. He listened to his advisers, his voice steady. "We must expand the Middle Kingdom. Silk will open doors where swords close them." But not all was bright. Li Wei knew the darker side of such journeys. His uncle, a former soldier, had spoken of the Gobi Desert, where sand buried the bones of travelers and the wind howled like the ghosts of the dead. There was no water, only mirages that taunted the thirsty, and bands of bandits who attacked caravans, leaving only blood on the sand. The Xiongnu were merciless. They rode swift horses, shot arrows from bows made of horn and sinew, and spared no one. Many envoys never returned. Their families waited years, gazing at the setting sun with fading hope. Yet in that moment, in the library, Li Wei felt a surge of excitement. "Sir, take me with you," he blurted out. "I'm strong. I know how to care for animals. I want to see that world." Zhong Qian studied him for a long moment, his eyes glinting in the lamplight. "Boy, this is no game. The road is long, full of dangers. But the Emperor seeks the brave. If your heart calls, come at dawn to the palace gate. We leave in a week." That night, Li Wei returned to his small room in the servants' quarter, where his bed was a simple straw mat and the air smelled of boiled rice from the neighbors. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding like a festival drum. Joy mingled with fear. What would his mother, waiting in the village, say? Would he survive the journey? But the feeling was undeniable. Something grand was beginning, like the first drop of rain before a storm that would nourish the earth. The next days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Li Wei was granted permission to join the caravan. Emperor Wu Di, in his wisdom, valued the loyalty of common folk. They packed silk, rolls of fabric, soft as a baby's skin, dyed in purple and gold with pigments from snails and saffron. The scent of the dyes was sharp, mixed with the wax used to protect the fabric from moisture. Commanders trained the guards. The clash of swords echoed in the courtyard, and sweat dripped down the men's faces, leaving a salty taste on their lips. The imperial court buzzed with rumors. Court ladies, in silk robes that whispered with every step, gossiped about distant kingdoms. Their women wear gold ornaments like ours, but their hair is red as fire. Musicians played the guqin, stringed instruments with silk strings, producing melancholic melodies, as if bidding farewell to home. The food at banquets was exquisite. Roasted ducks with crisp skin, flavored with soy sauce that tasted both salty and sweet, and rice cooked with lotus seeds that crunched between the teeth. Yet beneath the splendor lay unease. Many remembered past missions that had ended in failure. At last, the day of departure arrived. At dawn, as mist curled over the Wei River, the caravan gathered at the gate. Camels bellowed softly, their humps swaying, laden with sacks. Zhong Qian stood at the front, his woolen cloak shielding him from the morning chill. Li Wei, with a small sack on his back, containing dried meat, a water flask, and an amulet from his mother, felt his legs tremble. Emperor Wu Di appeared on a balcony, his voice resounding, "Go with the blessing of the heavens. Bring us glory and new horizons." As the gate creaked open, the caravan moved forward. Dust rose under hooves, the air thick with the scent of earth after the night's dew. Li Wei glanced back at the receding palace and thought, "This is it, the path that will connect worlds." But deep in his heart, he knew, ahead lay not only treasures but trials that would test them all. And so, under the soft rustle of silk in the sacks, they vanished into the distance, leaving the familiar world behind. Somewhere beyond the mountains, new lands awaited, where this small event, the departure of a caravan, would spark a wave of change, spreading like a river in flood. But what lay ahead in the steppes? Would they find allies or only traps of fate? That we will learn when the journey continues. The caravan moved slowly through the dusty plains beyond Chang'an, the capital's towering walls now a faint silhouette against the dawn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked grass and the earthy musk of the camels, whose heavy steps churned the soil into a fine haze. Li Wei walked near the rear, his sandals sinking slightly into the soft ground, his small sack bouncing against his back. Each step felt like a heartbeat, pulsing with the rhythm of something vast and unstoppable. The Silk Road, as it would later be called, was not yet a road but a dream, a fragile thread of ambition stretching toward the unknown. The caravan, with its 30 men, 20 camels, and rolls of precious silk, was a seed planted in the wilderness, destined to grow into a network that would bind empires. The first days were deceptively calm. The path wound through the fertile Wei River valley, where rice paddies shimmered like mirrors under the morning sun, reflecting a sky so blue it seemed to hum with promise. Farmers, bent low in their fields, paused to watch the caravan pass, their straw hats bobbing like buoys in a sea of green. The air smelled of wet earth and the faint sweetness of ripening millet. Li Wei, unused to such long marches, felt his legs ache by midday, the muscles tightening like taut bowstrings. Yet he pressed on, driven by the stories Zhong Qian had told him in the palace library, tales of distant kingdoms where men forged swords from iron stronger than bronze and wove fabrics from the wool of strange, horned beasts. Zhong Qian led the caravan with quiet authority, his figure upright on a sturdy horse, its mane braided with red cords for luck. He rarely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight, like stones dropped into a still pond. "Keep your eyes sharp," he told the men one evening as they camped by a stream. The fire crackled, its smoke curling upward, blending with the scent of roasted barley cakes and dried fish the men shared. The Xiongnu watch from the hills, their shadows, silent until they strike. His voice was low, steady, but it sent a shiver through Li Wei, who glanced at the darkening horizon, where the hills loomed like sleeping giants. The caravan was not alone in its journey. Word of the emperor's mission had spread, carried on the wings of rumor. In villages along the way, people whispered of the silk-laden camels and the brave, or foolish, men who dared to cross the steppes. Some saw opportunity. In a small market town, a merchant named Hu Tao joined the caravan. his cart piled with clay jars of fermented mare's milk and bundles of dried apricots that smelled of summer's end. Hu Tao was a wiry man with a quick laugh, his face tanned from years under the sun. "The West is hungry for silk," he told Li Wei as they walked, his breath puffing in the cool morning air. "And I'm hungry for their gold. They say in Fergana, horses sweat blood and run faster than the wind. I'll trade a jar of my milk for one of those." Li Wei liked Hu Tao's optimism, but he sensed the undercurrent of risk. The merchant's cart creaked under its load, and his stories of past journeys were laced with warnings. Bandits who slit throats for a single bolt of cloth, sandstorms that buried entire caravans, and rivers that swelled without warning, swallowing men and beasts alike. Yet Hu Tao's eyes sparkled with the thrill of it all, as if danger were just another spice in the stew of life. Li Wei, chewing on a tough strip of dried pork that tasted of salt and smoke, began to see the journey as more than a mission. It was a tide, pulling people from their homes, stirring dreams of wealth and adventure. As the days turned into weeks, the landscape changed. The lush valleys gave way to the edges of the Gobi Desert, where the earth cracked like old leather under the relentless sun. The air grew dry, smelling of dust and the faint metallic tang of heat. The camels, their humps sagging slightly from the long march, plodded on, their snorts mingling with the creak of wooden saddles. Li Wei's throat felt parched despite the water in his flask, which had warmed to the temperature of his skin. The silk, carefully wrapped in waxed cloth to protect it from the elements, seemed to whisper with every sway of the camel's steps, a reminder of the treasure they carried, and the target it painted on their backs. News of the caravan's journey spread faster than their footsteps. In a dusty outpost called Dunhuang, where the path split toward the western mountains, traders and travelers gathered like moths to a flame. The town was a patchwork of tents and mud-brick houses, its air thick with the smells of grilled mutton, cumin, and the sour tang of fermented beans sold by street vendors. Here, the caravan paused to restock. Li Wei watched as Zhong Qian bartered with local merchants, exchanging a small roll of silk, its surface shimmering like a river under moonlight, for sacks of millet, dried dates, and barrels of water. The locals stared at the silk with wide eyes, their fingers brushing it as if it were a sacred relic. "This will fetch a fortune in the West," one merchant murmured, his voice tinged with awe. "They've never seen anything so fine." Dunhuang was a crossroads, a place where rumors and ambitions collided. Li Wei overheard snippets of conversation, tales of a kingdom called Bactria, where men built cities of stone and worshipped fire, stories of oasis towns where water was more precious than gold, and whispers of the Xiongnu, who had already sent scouts to track the caravan's progress. One evening, as the men sat around a fire, its flames licking the cool desert air, a traveler from the west joined them. His name was Arosh, a wiry man with a sun-darkened face and a turban that smelled faintly of saffron. He spoke halting Chinese, his words accented with the cadence of a foreign tongue. "Your silk," he said, gesturing to the camels, "will open gates. But beware the Toklamacon. The desert eats men whole." Arosh's warning lingered in Li Wei's mind as the caravan left Dunhuang, heading toward the dreaded Toklamacon desert. The name itself sounded like a curse, and the men whispered it with unease. The path now followed the edge of the desert, where the ground was strewn with pebbles that crunched underfoot like broken bones. The air was heavy with the scent of dry sage and the faint, acrid smell of camel dung. At night, the stars burned bright, a canopy of light that felt both comforting and indifferent. Li Wei, lying on a thin blanket that smelled of dust and sweat, stared at the sky, wondering if the heavens watched over them or merely observed their struggles with cold detachment. The caravan grew as it moved. In a narrow valley, they were joined by a family of herders, 3 brothers and their elderly mother, who drove a small herd of goats, their bells jingling softly in the stillness. The mother, a woman named May, had eyes like polished stones and hands rough from years of tending animals. She offered the caravan fresh goat's milk, warm and slightly sweet, served in wooden bowls that smelled of cedar. In return, Zhong Qian gave her a small piece of silk, which she clutched as if it were a talisman. "We're going west," she said, her voice cracked but firm. "The grazing lands here are dry. They say there's green beyond the mountains." Her sons nodded, their faces etched with the same quiet determination Li Wei saw in Zhong Qian. This was the tide of migration, subtle but relentless. The emperor's mission had sparked something larger than a single caravan. It was a movement, pulling people from their roots toward a horizon they could barely imagine. Li Wei felt it in the air, in the stories shared around campfires, in the way strangers joined their march with dreams of their own. There was Hu Tao chasing gold, Mei and her sons seeking new pastures, and Li Wei himself, driven by a hunger to see the world beyond the Yellow River. Even Zhong Qian, the stoic envoy, seemed to carry a private hope, to redeem his years in Xiongnu captivity by forging a path for the empire. But the journey was not without its shadows. One night, as the caravan camped near an oasis, the men woke to the sound of hooves thundering in the distance. Zhong Qian, his sword drawn, signaled for silence. The fire had been doused, but the air still smelled of charred wood and fear. Li Wei's heart pounded as he crouched behind a camel, its warm flank pressed against him. The hooves faded, but the tension lingered. "Xiongnu scouts," Zhong Qian whispered later, his face grim. "They're watching. They know what we carry." The next morning, the caravan moved faster, the men's faces tight with unease. The silk, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a burden, its value drawing danger like flies to honey. Li Wei, wiping sweat from his brow, tasted the salt on his lips and wondered if they would reach the west or become another tale of bones lost to the desert. Yet as the sun rose, casting golden light over the dunes, he saw Zhong Qian scanning the horizon, his eyes alight with resolve. The envoy's dream, of alliances, of a world connected by silk, was spreading, carried by every step they took, every stranger who joined their path. And so, the caravan pressed on, a small ripple in a growing wave. Beyond the desert lay mountains, and beyond them, kingdoms unknown. Would they find welcome or betrayal? Would the silk open doors, or would the desert claim them first? The answers lay ahead, shimmering like a mirage, waiting to be discovered. The caravan pressed deeper into the Taklamakan desert, where the world seemed to shrink to an endless expanse of sand and sky. The sun hung heavy above, its heat pressing down like a blacksmith's forge, baking the earth until it shimmered with waves of distortion. The air smelled of scorched dust and the faint, musky odor of the camels, whose plodding steps stirred clouds of fine grit that clung to Li Wei's skin, gritty between his teeth. His sandals, worn thin from weeks of walking, burned against his soles, and the weight of his small sack, now lighter from dwindling rations, felt like a reminder of how far they were from the lush valleys of Chong'an. Yet, in this harsh landscape, survival was not just about enduring the elements. It was about the small, deliberate acts that tethered life to hope, the daily rituals that wove the caravan into a fragile community. Each morning began with the same rhythm. At dawn, when the air was still cool and carried a faint trace of dew, Zhong Qian roused the men with a low command. The camp stirred to life, the creak of leather saddles, the soft grunts of camels rising to their feet, and the rustle of waxed cloth as the precious silk was checked for damage. Li Wei's task was to tend the animals, a job he'd taken on naturally, given his childhood among the goats and oxen of his village. He brushed sand from the camels' coarse fur, their breath warm and sour as they chewed clumps of dried tamarisk leaves. The water barrels, filled at the last oasis, were rationed carefully. Each man received a small cup, just enough to wet the throat, tasting faintly of the wooden staves and the earth from which it was drawn. Food was sparse but carefully prepared. By midday, when the caravan paused to rest in the meagre shade of a rocky outcrop, the men gathered around a small fire of dried dung and twigs. The flames crackled faintly, giving off a sharp, acrid smoke that stung the eyes. Hu Tao, the merchant who had joined them in Dunhuang, took charge of the cooking. He boiled millet in a dented bronze pot, the grains swelling into a thick porridge that smelled of toasted earth. To this he added slivers of dried mutton, tough and salty, but prized for the strength it gave. Li Wei savoured each bite, the warmth spreading through his chest, chasing away the ache of hunger. Sometimes May, the herder's mother, shared her goat's milk, still warm from the udder, its creamy sweetness a rare comfort in the desert's austerity. The meals were more than sustenance. They were moments of connection. As the men ate, they sat cross-legged on woven mats, their faces streaked with dust and sweat, sharing stories to pass the time. Hu Tao, ever the storyteller, spoke of a trader he'd met who claimed to have seen a city where houses were carved into cliffs, their windows glowing with lamplight like stars trapped in stone. May, her voice soft as the wind, recounted folk tales from her village, stories of fox spirits who lured travellers astray, their laughter echoing in the dunes. Li Wei listened, his spoon scraping the bottom of his bowl, the taste of millet lingering on his tongue. These moments, brief as they were, felt like anchors, grounding the caravan against the vastness of the desert. But survival demanded more than food and stories. The desert was a relentless adversary, its challenges woven into every hour. By afternoon, the heat was unbearable, the air so dry it seemed to pull moisture from the lungs. Li Wei's lips cracked, and he learned to wrap a strip of cloth around his face, as Zhong Qian did, to shield against the sand that stung like tiny arrows. The camels, though hardy, grew sluggish, their humps shrinking as their bodies burned through stored fat. Water was the greatest treasure, more precious than the silk they carried. Once, when a barrel tipped and spilled into the sand, the men watched in silence as the dark patch vanished, swallowed by the earth. Zhong Qian's face tightened, but he said nothing, only rationed the remaining water more strictly. Nights brought relief, but also new trials. The desert cold was sharp, cutting through Li Wei's thin cloak, which smelled of sweat and dust. The men huddled close to the fire, its glow casting long shadows that danced across the dunes. Sleep was fitful, interrupted by the howl of distant wolves or the sudden rustle of wind, which Zhong Qian warned could signal approaching raiders. Li Wei learned to sleep with one hand on his knife, a small bronze blade his father had given him, its handle worn smooth from years of use. The stars above were brilliant, a tapestry of light that felt both eternal and indifferent, and Li Wei often lay awake, wondering if his mother, back in the village, looked at the same sky. The caravan's survival depended on discipline and ingenuity. Zhong Qian, ever the leader, organized the men into shifts. Some guarded the camp, their spears glinting in the moonlight, while others checked the loads, ensuring the silk remained dry and secure. The waxed cloth that wrapped the rolls was inspected daily, its surface slick and cool to the touch, protecting the delicate fabric from sand and moisture. Li Wei marveled at the silk's resilience, how it could be so soft yet withstand the desert's cruelty. It was a reminder of why they endured. This treasure, born of silkworms and human hands, was their key to the West, a currency more powerful than gold. Yet the desert tested their spirits as much as their bodies. One evening, as the caravan camped near a dried riverbed, a young guard named Chen, barely older than Li Wei, began to weep. His sobs were soft, muffled by the wind, but they carried the weight of exhaustion and fear. "I left my sister alone," he whispered, his voice breaking. "What if I don't return?" The others sat in silence, their faces lit by the fire's glow, each man grappling with his own doubts. May, the herder's mother, knelt beside Chen and offered him a sip of her goat's milk, her wrinkled hand steady on his shoulder. "We carry our homes in our hearts," she said. "You'll see her again." Her words, simple but firm, seemed to stitch the group back together, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles. Li Wei, too, felt the weight of homesickness. At night, when the camp was quiet, he clutched the amulet his mother had given him, a small jade pendant carved with a lotus, cool against his skin. He remembered her hands, rough from years of weaving and planting, and the way she'd smiled when he left, hiding her fear behind pride. The memory brought a lump to his throat, but it also steeled him. He was here, in the heart of the desert, because he'd chosen this path. The thought of her waiting, of the village unchanged while he ventured into the unknown, gave him a strange strength, like a root anchoring a tree in a storm. As the weeks wore on, the caravan adapted to the desert's rhythms. They learned to spot the faint green of tamarisk bushes, a sign of water beneath the sand. They dug shallow wells, the earth cool and damp under their fingers, and filled their barrels with water that tasted of clay but was life itself. They rationed their food with care, saving the dried fruit for moments of weakness, its sweetness a burst of joy on weary tongues. Even the camels seemed to understand the stakes, their steps steady despite the shrinking humps and the sand that clung to their eyelashes. One night, as the caravan camped in the shadow of a dune, Zhong Qian gathered the men. The fire was low, its smoke curling upward, carrying the scent of burning sage. "We're nearing the edge of the Taklamakan," he said, his voice steady but tinged with caution. "Beyond lies the Jade Gate, the last outpost before the mountains. But the Xiongnu are close. I've seen their tracks, hoofprints in the sand, fresh as yesterday's wind." The men exchanged glances, their faces taut. Li Wei felt a chill, not from the cold, but from the realization that the desert was only the first trial. The mountains, and whatever lay beyond, would demand even more. As the fire died to embers, Li Wei lay on his mat, the ground hard beneath him, the air heavy with the scent of sand and smoke. He thought of the silk, tucked safely in its waxed wrappings, and the dreams it carried. Zhong Qian's hope for alliances, Hu Tao's hunger for gold, Mei's search for new pastures, and his own yearning for a world beyond the horizon. The caravan was a tiny speck in the desert, but its movement was stirring something larger, a ripple that would spread across lands and peoples yet unseen. What awaited them at the Jade Gate? Would it be a gateway to new worlds or a trap set by their enemies? The answer lay just beyond the next dune, shimmering like the promise of dawn. The caravan reached the Jade Gate, a weathered fortress of mud brick and stone that stood like a weary sentinel at the edge of the Taklamakan desert. Its walls, baked golden by centuries of sun, loomed against a sky streaked with wisps of cloud, and the air carried the sharp scent of dry earth mixed with the faint sweetness of oasis palms. For Li Wei, the sight of the gate was a balm after weeks of endless dunes, where the sand had stung his eyes and the heat had pressed against his chest like a heavy stone. The fortress marked the boundary between the familiar world of the Han Empire and the vast unknown beyond, where the Silk Road would begin to weave its threads through foreign lands. Here, at this crossroads, cultures collided, mingled, and sparked like flint against steel, creating moments of wonder and tension that would linger in Li Wei's memory like the aftertaste of a strange new dish. The Jade Gate was more than an outpost. It was a melting pot. Traders, nomads, and wanderers gathered in its shadow, their voices a cacophony of languages that buzzed like a beehive. Tents of felt and canvas sprawled around the fortress, their colors faded by the sun but vibrant in their variety. Reds, blues, and yellows stitched with patterns Li Wei had never seen. The air was thick with the smells of sizzling meat, roasted over open fires, and the tangy aroma of fermented mare's milk sold in leather pouches by hawkers with wind-burned faces. Li Wei's stomach growled as he passed a stall where a woman grilled skewers of lamb, the fat hissing as it dripped into the flames, releasing a savory scent that made his mouth water. She sprinkled the meat with cumin and dried chili, spices that burned his tongue when he traded a copper coin for a skewer, their heat both startling and invigorating. Zhong Qian, ever watchful, led the caravan to a shaded courtyard within the fortress, where the camels were tethered near a stone trough filled with water that shimmered in the sunlight. The animals drank greedily, their snorts mingling with the clink of bronze bells tied to their harnesses. The silk, still wrapped in its waxed cloth, was stacked carefully under a canopy, its faint sheen catching the eye of every passer-by. Li Wei noticed how the locals stared, their gazes a mix of curiosity and hunger. A Sogdian trader, his turban adorned with a single turquoise bead, approached Zhong Qian, his hands gesturing animatedly as he spoke in a lilting tongue. Through an interpreter, a wiry boy who spoke both Chinese and Sogdian with equal ease, Li Wei learned that the trader offered jade and lapis lazuli for a single roll of silk. Zhong Qian declined politely, his voice calm but firm. "Our silk is for the West, for kings and warriors. But we'll trade for supplies." The encounter was a glimpse of the world they were entering, where silk was not just cloth but a currency of power, a bridge between peoples who shared little else. Li Wei watched as the Sogdian trader walked away, his robes swaying, their embroidery glinting like stars in the daylight. The man's clothing was unlike anything in Chong'an, loose, flowing, and dyed in deep indigo, with patterns of swirling vines that seemed to tell stories of their own. Li Wei wondered what tales those vines held, what gods or spirits they honored in lands he could scarcely imagine. The caravan rested at the Jade Gate for 3 days, a chance to replenish and prepare for the mountains ahead. Li Wei, freed from his duties for an afternoon, wandered the marketplace, his senses overwhelmed by the collision of cultures. A group of musicians played near a fountain, their instruments strange to his ears, a drum with a taut hide that thumped like a heartbeat, and a stringed lute that wailed like a mournful wind. The music was raw, untamed, unlike the delicate melodies of the guqin in the imperial court. A dancer, her hair braided with beads that clicked with every movement, spun in time to the rhythm, her skirt flaring like a blooming flower. Li Wei watched, mesmerized as she moved, her feet stirring the dust, her laughter mingling with the music. The air around her smelled of rosewater and sweat, a heady mix that made him feel both alive and out of place. Food was another bridge between worlds. At a stall run by a Bactrian couple, Li Wei tasted flatbread baked on hot stones, its surface crisp and smoky, served with a paste of crushed sesame seeds that was nutty and rich. The couple, their faces lined from years under a foreign sun, spoke of their homeland, where vineyards stretched across valleys and wine was as common as water. "Try this," the woman said, offering Li Wei a small cup of fermented grape juice, its taste sharp and sweet, unlike the rice wine of his village. He sipped it slowly, the warmth spreading through his chest, and for a moment he felt as if he'd stepped into their world, a place of rolling hills and stone temples far beyond the desert. Clothing, too, told stories of difference and exchange. Li Wei noticed a group of Yuezhi nomads, their tunics made of coarse wool dyed in earthy reds and browns, adorned with bronze clasps shaped like galloping horses. Their boots, sturdy and caked with mud, smelled of leather and animal fat, a stark contrast to the silk slippers of the Han court. One of the nomads, a young woman with eyes like polished amber, traded a pair of wool gloves for a scrap of silk from Hu Tao's cart. She ran her fingers over the fabric, her expression a mix of awe and suspicion, as if she couldn't believe something so delicate could exist. Li Wei, watching from a distance, felt a pang of pride for his homeland's craft, but also a curiosity about her life. Herding sheep under a sky that stretched forever, her hands calloused from rains and wind. These encounters were not always smooth. Language barriers sparked misunderstandings, and mistrust simmered beneath the surface. One evening, as the caravan dined on roasted goat shared by May's family, a heated argument broke out between Hu Tao and a Parthian trader over the price of a camel. The Parthian, his beard oiled and gleaming, gestured wildly, his words incomprehensible but his anger clear. Zhong Qian stepped in, his calm presence diffusing the tension, but Li Wei saw the flicker of unease in the men's eyes. The world beyond the Jade Gate was a tapestry of beauty and conflict, where every exchange carried the weight of survival. Yet there were moments of unexpected connection. One night, around a communal fire, the caravan shared a meal with a group of Tocharian traders, their hair red as autumn leaves, a sight that left Li Wei staring. They sang songs in a language that rose and fell like waves, accompanied by a flute carved from bone, its notes haunting and clear. May, the herder's mother, joined them, humming a tune from her village that somehow harmonized with theirs. The firelight danced on their faces, and for a moment, the differences, language, dress, gods, melted into the shared warmth of the flames, the shared taste of barley porridge seasoned with wild herbs. Li Wei, chewing slowly, felt a strange kinship, as if the act of eating together could bridge worlds. The Silk Road, still in its infancy, was becoming a conduit for these encounters. The silk itself was a catalyst, drawing people together like a magnet. A local scribe, his fingers stained with ink, sketched the caravan's arrival on a scroll, noting the silk's beauty and the Han men's strange attire, tunics and sashes that seemed impractical to desert folk. In return, Zhong Qian gifted him a small piece of silk, which the scribe accepted with a bow, his eyes gleaming with plans to trade it for stories from distant lands. Li Wei realized that the silk was more than a commodity. It was a language, speaking of wealth, craft, and possibility. As the caravan prepared to leave the Jade Gate, Li Wei stood at the edge of the fortress, looking west toward the Pamir Mountains, their peaks jagged against the horizon. The air was cooler now, carrying the scent of pine from the distant slopes. He felt the weight of the journey ahead, not just the physical climb, but the meeting of worlds that would test their courage and curiosity. The Jade Gate had shown him a glimpse of what lay beyond, a mosaic of peoples, each with their own songs, foods, and dreams, yet bound by the promise of trade and the allure of silk. But as the caravan packed its goods, a shadow fell over the camp. A scout returned, his horse lathered with sweat, his voice urgent as he spoke to Zhong Qian. "Xiongnu riders, not 2 days behind," he said, his breath ragged. The men fell silent, the air thick with a scent of fear and dust. Zhong Qian's face was unreadable, but his hand rested on his sword. The Silk Road was opening doors, but it was also drawing enemies, their eyes fixed on the treasure that shimmered in the caravan's sacks. What would happen when the Xiongnu caught up? Would the encounters at the Jade Gate, moments of song, food, and shared fire, be enough to forge alliances, or would the desert's darker forces prevail? The answers lay beyond the mountains, where the Silk Road would weave its next chapter. The caravan left the Jade Gate behind, climbing into the foothills of the Pamir Mountains, where the air grew thin and sharp, scented with pine and the faint metallic tang of frost. The path was narrow, a winding scar cut into the rocky slopes, where loose stones skittered underfoot and the wind howled like a restless spirit. Li Wei's breath came in short puffs, visible in the chilly dawn, as he tugged at the lead rope of a camel, its hooves scraping against the gravel. The silk, still secure in its waxed wrappings, swayed with the animal's steps, a quiet reminder of their purpose. But the promise of distant kingdoms felt far away now, overshadowed by the dangers that had begun to close in like wolves circling a fire. The Silk Road, for all its allure, was revealing its darker side: hunger, treachery, and the ever-present threat of the Xiongnu. The first signs of trouble came not from enemies, but from the land itself. The mountains were unforgiving, their peaks cloaked in clouds that smelled of coming snow. The caravan's supplies, already stretched thin from the desert, dwindled faster in the cold. The millet porridge, once a daily staple, was now rationed to a few spoonfuls, its earthy flavor barely masking the gnawing emptiness in Li Wei's stomach. The dried mutton was gone, replaced by tough strips of goat jerky that tasted of salt and sinew, chewed slowly to make it last. Water was scarce. The streams they found were often frozen, forcing the men to chip away at the ice with knives, their hands numb and red. The cold seeped into Li Wei's bones, his thin cloak, smelling of sweat and dust, no match for the biting wind. Hunger sharpened tempers. One evening, as the caravan camped in a narrow valley, a fight broke out over a small sack of dried apricots. Chen, the young guard who had wept for his sister, accused another man, a grizzled archer named Gao, of stealing his share. Their shouts echoed off the cliffs, sharp as the crack of breaking ice. Gao's face reddened, his hand gripping his dagger, while Chen's eyes burned with desperation. Zhong Qian stepped between them, his voice a low growl. "We starve together, or we survive together. Choose." The men backed down, but the tension lingered, a sour note in the air like the smell of unwashed bodies huddled too close. Li Wei felt the hunger too, a dull ache that made his thoughts sluggish. He dreamed of his mother's rice porridge, flavored with green onions and a single egg, its warmth spreading through him like a memory of home. Awake, he chewed on a piece of jerky, its texture like leather, and sipped water that tasted of stone. May, the herder's mother, shared what little she had, a handful of roasted barley grains, their nutty flavor a fleeting comfort. Her goats, now fewer after one fell into a ravine, were milked sparingly, the liquid too precious to waste. "Eat slowly," she told Li Wei, her voice soft but firm. "The body can endure more than the heart believes." Her words steadied him, but they couldn't quiet the fear that gnawed as fiercely as the cold. The Xiongnu were a shadow that grew darker with each passing day. Their scouts had been spotted, fleeting figures on horseback, their silhouettes vanishing into the mist. One night, as the caravan camped in a sheltered gorge, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, a sentry raised the alarm. Hoofbeats thundered in the distance, accompanied by the eerie whistle of arrows slicing through the air. The men scrambled, dousing the fire, its embers hissing as they died. Li Wei crouched behind a boulder, his heart pounding, the cold stone pressing against his palms. Zhong Qian, sword drawn, whispered orders. "Stay low. They test us, not attack." The hoofbeats faded, but the fear remained, a bitter taste in Li Wei's mouth, like the metallic tang of blood. The next morning they found tracks, hoofprints etched deep in the frost-dusted earth, circling the camp. Zhong Qian's face was grim as he studied them, his breath clouding in the cold. "They're toying with us," he said. "They want the silk, but they'll wait for weakness." The men exchanged glances, their faces pale, their hands tightening on spears and bows. Li Wei felt a chill deeper than the mountain air. The Xiongnu were not just warriors, they were ghosts of the steppe, striking without warning, their arrows tipped with poison that burned like fire in the veins. Stories from the Jade Gate echoed in his mind, entire caravans slaughtered, their goods scattered, their bones left for the vultures. Treachery came from within as well. Hu Tao, the merchant, had grown quieter since the Jade Gate, his quick laugh replaced by a calculating glint in his eyes. One evening, as the men rested, Li Wei overheard him whispering to a guard, offering a share of future profits for extra protection of his cart. The guard refused, but the seed of distrust was planted. Later, when a sack of barley was found slashed, its contents spilled into the dirt, suspicion fell on Hu Tao. He denied it, his voice loud and indignant, but the damage was done. The men watched him warily, their unity fraying like a worn rope. Li Wei, who had once admired Hu Tao's optimism, now saw the merchant's ambition as a spark that could ignite disaster. The mountains brought other dangers. A sudden rockslide, triggered by a tremor in the earth, nearly buried half the caravan. The camels bellowed, their cries echoing as stones crashed down, sending up clouds of dust that smelled of crushed rock and fear. Li Wei dove to the ground, his hands scraping against sharp gravel, his heart racing as he shielded his head. When the dust settled, one man lay dead, his skull crushed, his blood soaking the earth. The men buried him in a shallow grave, piling stones to mark the spot, their hands trembling from cold and grief. May, her face etched with sorrow, murmured a prayer to the spirits of the mountains, her voice blending with the wind. The loss hung heavy, a reminder that the Silk Road demanded sacrifices beyond hunger and cold. Yet even in this darkness, there were flickers of resilience. The men adapted, learning to read the mountain's moods, the way clouds gathered before a storm, the sound of loose stones signaling danger. They shared what little they had, passing around a single wineskin filled with sour grape juice traded at the Jade Gate, its warmth a brief defiance of the cold. Li Wei found solace in small tasks, brushing the camels, their coarse fur warm under his hands, or helping May milk her goats, the rhythmic squeeze of the udder grounding him. Zhong Qian, though stern, showed moments of care, distributing his own rations to the weakest men, his silence a strength that held the caravan together. One night, as they camped in a high pass, the air sharp with the scent of snow, Zhong Qian gathered the men around a small fire. Its flames struggled against the wind, casting shadows that danced like spectres. "We've faced hunger, cold, and fear," he said, his voice steady as stone. "But we carry the Emperor's will, and the silk that will bind nations. The Xiongnu want to break us, but we will not bend." His words, though simple, rekindled a spark in Li Wei's chest. He thought of the silk, its softness a contrast to the harshness around them, and imagined it reaching distant kings, weaving a thread of hope through the darkness. But the darkness was not done with them. As the caravan descended toward the Fergana Valley, where green fields and swift horses were said to await, a scout returned with dire news. A Xiongnu raiding party, larger than before, was closing in. Their tracks were fresh, their numbers unknown. The men's faces tightened, their hands gripping weapons, the air heavy with the scent of fear and steel. Zhong Qian's eyes narrowed, his hand resting on his sword. "We move at dawn," he said. "The valley is close, but so are they." Li Wei lay awake that night, the cold ground pressing against his back, the stars hidden by clouds that smelled of snow. The Silk Road had shown him beauty, songs, foods, faces, but now it revealed its teeth. Hunger, betrayal, and the shadow of the Xiongnu loomed like storm clouds, threatening to drown their dreams. Would they reach Fergana, or would the mountains claim them as they had so many before? The answer lay in the valley below, where the Silk Road would test their courage once more. The caravan descended into the Fergana Valley, where the harshness of the Pamir Mountains gave way to a world of green and gold. The air softened, carrying the scent of fresh grass and blooming wildflowers, their delicate sweetness a stark contrast to the biting frost of the peaks. The valley stretched wide, its fields dotted with grazing horses, sleek creatures with manes that flowed like silk in the wind, their hooves drumming a rhythm that echoed the caravan's own heartbeat. For Li Wei, whose legs ached from the rocky trails and whose stomach still growled from sparse rations, the sight was a balm, a promise that the Silk Road could lead to places of abundance. But it was not just the land that felt alive. It was the people, the communities forming like beads strung along the trade route, transforming the chaos of their journey into something resembling order. The caravan made camp near a bustling settlement called Urshi, a hub where traders, herders, and craftsmen converged. The town was a patchwork of mud-brick houses and felt tents, their roofs adorned with woven banners that fluttered in the breeze, catching the sunlight like sails. The air was alive with the smells of baking bread, sizzling lamb fat, and the sharp tang of fermented mare's milk sold in clay jugs by vendors with calloused hands. Li Wei, his cloak dusted with the grime of the mountains, felt a spark of wonder as he walked through the narrow streets. Voices rose and fell in a dozen tongues, blending with the clatter of cartwheels and the bleating of goats, creating a symphony of life that felt both chaotic and harmonious. Zhong Qian, ever the diplomat, sought out the town's leader, a wiry man named Kove, whose beard was streaked with grey and whose eyes gleamed with the shrewdness of a seasoned trader. Kove welcomed the caravan with a feast, held in a courtyard shaded by mulberry trees, their leaves rustling softly overhead. The tables were laden with food, flatbreads still warm from the oven, their surfaces dusted with sesame seeds, roasted mutton glazed with honey and cumin, its aroma rich and savory, and bowls of yogurt mixed with crushed mint, cool and tangy on the tongue. Li Wei, seated on a woven mat, savored each bite, the flavors bursting like memories of home yet distinctly foreign. The wine, poured from earthen jars, was tart and strong, warming his chest and loosening the tension of the journey. The feast was more than a meal. It was a ritual of community. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet, Kove's people gathered around a bonfire, its flames crackling and sending sparks into the night. Musicians played, a drum that pulsed like a heartbeat, a flute that wove mournful melodies, and a stringed instrument that hummed with a resonance Li Wei had never heard. The townsfolk sang songs of their valley, of horses that ran like the wind and heroes who tamed the rivers. Mei, the herder's mother, joined in with a song from her village, her voice soft but clear, blending with the foreign notes as if they were old friends. Li Wei, sipping his wine, felt a warmth that went beyond the fire, a sense of belonging, however fleeting, to this moment of shared humanity. Urshi was a microcosm of the Silk Road's emerging society. Traders from Bactria, their robes dyed in deep indigo, bartered jade and wool for the caravan's silk, their hands brushing the fabric with reverence. Herders from the steppes, their tunics smelling of leather and horse sweat, drove their flocks to market, exchanging them for iron tools and spices. Craftsmen, their workshops filled with the clink of hammers and the scent of molten bronze, forged knives and jewelry that would travel far beyond the valley. Li Wei watched as Zhong Qian negotiated with Kove, offering a roll of silk, its surface shimmering like a river under moonlight, for a dozen of Fergona's famed horses, their coats glossy and their eyes fierce. The deal was sealed with a handshake, the air heavy with the scent of trust and ambition. The caravan's presence sparked a flurry of activity. Families like Mei's, who had joined in search of new pastures, began to settle, their goats grazing alongside local herds. Mei's sons built a small pen, their hands quick with ropes and stakes, the air filled with the earthy smell of freshly turned soil. Hu Tao, the merchant, set up a stall in the market, trading his fermented mare's milk for silver coins and stories of distant lands. Even Chen, the young guard, found a role, teaching the local boys how to shoot a Han-style bow, its twang echoing through the valley. Li Wei, tasked with tending the camels, noticed how the animals adapted, nibbling on the valley's grasses, their humps slowly regaining their fullness. The caravan was no longer just a band of travelers. It was a seed, planting roots in a new community. Yet this budding society was not without its tensions. The influx of outsiders stirred unease among some locals, who feared their resources, water, grazing land, trade, would be stretched thin. One night, as the caravan joined a festival celebrating the harvest, a drunken herder accused Hu Tao of overcharging for his goods. The argument flared, voices rising over the crackle of the bonfire, until Kove intervened, his authority calming the crowd. Li Wei, watching from the sidelines, saw the fragility of this new order, how quickly trust could unravel, like a thread pulled from a tapestry. The scent of roasted chestnuts and spilled wine lingered, a reminder of celebration tinged with conflict. Stories around the fire became a way to bridge these divides. One evening, as the stars burned bright overhead, Kove shared a tale of Fergona's origins, a legend of a horse guard who galloped from the heavens, bringing prosperity to the valley. Zhong Qian, in turn, spoke of the Han Empire, of the emperor's vision to connect the world through silk. The men listened, their faces lit by the fire's glow, their breaths mingling with the smoky air. Li Wei, clutching his jade amulet, added a story from his village, a tale of a river spirit who blessed the fields with water. The stories wove together, different yet resonant, like the threads of a loom creating a single cloth. The air smelled of burning cedar and shared dreams, a fragile bond forming in the flicker of the flames. The caravan's stay in Urshi was brief, but it left its mark. The silk, once a distant treasure, became a symbol of possibility, inspiring locals to dream of trade routes to the west. Kave, intrigued by Zhong Qian's mission, sent 2 of his men to join the caravan, their saddlebags packed with dried figs and wool blankets that smelled of lanolin. Mei's family chose to stay, their goats now part of the valley's herds, but she gifted Li Wei a small pouch of roasted barley, its nutty scent a reminder of her kindness. "For the road," she said, her eyes crinkling with a smile. Li Wei, tucking the pouch into his sack, felt a pang of loss but also gratitude, as if the valley had become a second home. As the caravan prepared to leave, the threat of the Xiongnu loomed once more. Scouts reported sightings of riders in the hills, their shadows fleeting but ominous. Zhong Qian, his face etched with resolve, tightened the caravan's formation, placing the silk at the center, guarded by men with spears and bows. The horses from Fergana, strong and swift, were saddled, their neighs cutting through the morning air. Li Wei, stroking a camel's flank, felt the weight of their journey, the communities they'd touched, the dangers they'd faced, and the uncertain path ahead. The Silk Road was knitting people together, but it was also a thread stretched taut, vulnerable to the blade of conflict. As they marched out of Urshi, the valley fading into the distance, Li Wei looked back at the smoke rising from the town's chimneys, the air carrying the faint scent of bread and hope. The Silk Road was building something new, cities, friendships, stories, but it was also a crucible, testing the strength of those who walked it. What lay beyond the valley? Would the Xiongnu strike, or would the next community offer refuge? The answers waited, woven into the fabric of the journey, ready to unfold. The caravan pressed westward from the Fergana Valley, the green fields giving way to rolling steppes where the wind carried the scent of wild thyme and distant rain. The sky stretched vast above, its deep blue broken only by wisps of cloud that drifted like the thoughts of weary travelers. Li Wei walked with a steady rhythm, his sandals worn thin, the soles crusted with the dust of 1,000 miles. The silk, still cradled in its waxed wrappings, swayed gently on the camels' backs, a quiet promise of the empire's ambition. The journey had been long, through deserts that burned, mountains that chilled, and valleys that offered fleeting refuge. Now, as the caravan neared the edges of Bactria, Li Wei felt the weight of their travels settle into his bones, not as exhaustion but as a tapestry of experiences that had changed him and the world around him. This was a moment to reflect, to trace the ripples their journey had sent across lands and peoples, and to consider the legacy of the Silk Road that was only beginning to take shape. The impact of their mission was already visible, like the first strokes of ink on a scroll. In Urshi, the silk they had traded had sparked a hunger for trade, drawing merchants from distant corners to the valley's markets. The horses they had acquired, sleek, powerful creatures with eyes like polished obsidian, were more than beasts. They were a bridge to new alliances, their hoofbeats a symbol of connection between the Han Empire and the West. Li Wei thought of Kove, the town leader, whose shrewd eyes had softened at the sight of the silk, envisioning a future where his valley became a hub of commerce. The scent of the mulberry trees in Urshi lingered in Li Wei's memory. Their rustling leaves a whisper of prosperity that the caravan had planted. But the legacy was not just in trade. It was in the people they had met, the lives they had touched. May, the herder's mother, had stayed behind in Urshi, her goats now grazing alongside local herds, her sons building a new life. Her gift of roasted barley, still tucked in Li Wei's sack, carried the nutty warmth of her kindness, a reminder that the Silk Road was as much about human bonds as it was about goods. Even Hu Tao, the merchant whose ambition had stirred mistrust, had left his mark, his cart of fermented mare's milk a small but vital thread in the valley's growing market. Li Wei, chewing a piece of the barley as he walked, tasted its earthy flavor and felt a pang of gratitude for the fleeting community they had formed, a community that would endure in the stories told around Urshi's fires. The journey had also changed the caravan itself. Zhong Qian, once a distant figure of authority, had become a leader whose quiet strength Li Wei now understood. His stories of captivity among the Xiongnu, shared in rare moments by the fire, revealed a man who had endured loss and rebuilt hope. The scent of burning cedar from those campfires lingered in Li Wei's mind, a symbol of resilience that bound the men together. Chen, the young guard, had grown steadier, his fear replaced by a quiet resolve, his bow now an extension of his will. Even Li Wei felt different. His hands, once soft from palace duties, were now calloused, his heart no longer tethered only to his village but to a world unfolding before him. The Silk Road's legacy was also one of transformation for the lands it crossed. In the markets of Dunhuang and the Jade Gate, the caravan silk had sparked whispers of the Han Empire, a distant power whose wealth was woven into every shimmering thread. Traders like the Sogdian with his turquoise bead and the Bactrian couple with their grape wine had carried those whispers westward, planting seeds of curiosity and ambition. Li Wei imagined their stories spreading like ripples in a pond, reaching cities where stone temples rose and fire was worshipped, where silk would become a symbol of a world connected. The air, now tinged with the grassy scent of the steppes, seemed to hum with the potential of those connections, as if the earth itself sensed the change. Yet reflection brought shadows as well. The dangers they had faced, hunger, cold, the Xiongnu's lurking threat, were not just trials but warnings of the Silk Road's cost. The man lost to the rockslide in the Pamirs, his grave a pile of stones under a cold sky, was a reminder that not all would see the journey's end. The Xiongnu, whose hoofprints still haunted their trail, were a force that could unravel the fragile threads of trade and trust. Li Wei, clutching his jade amulet, felt the weight of those losses, their memory sharp as the tang of blood in the air after a battle. The Silk Road was a dream, but it was forged in sacrifice, its beauty tempered by the harshness of the world it sought to bind. The caravan's arrival in Bactria marked a turning point. The city they approached, a sprawl of mud-brick walls and domed roofs, buzzed with life. The air was thick with the sense of baking bread, crushed coriander, and the musky odor of livestock penned in nearby markets. Traders in flowing robes, their voices a chorus of Persian, Greek, and unfamiliar tongues, haggled over goods, ivory, spices, and now, the Han silk that Zhong Qian presented to a local governor. The governor, a stout man with a gold ring in his ear, ran his fingers over the fabric, its softness a marvel against his weathered hands. "This will change everything," he said, his voice heavy with awe. The silk was not just a gift, it was a promise of wealth, a catalyst for markets that would grow like vines across the region. The exchange in Bactria was a glimpse of the Silk Road's future. The horses, jade, and spices the caravan received in return would flow back to Chong'an, strengthening the empire's armies and enriching its courts. But more than goods, it was the ideas that would endure, the songs shared in Urshi, the stories of fox spirits and horse gods, the taste of yogurt and wine that Li Wei would carry in his memory. These were the threads that wove cultures together, creating a legacy that would outlast the men who walked the road. Li Wei, watching the Bactrian governor admire the silk, felt a swell of pride but also a question. What would this mean for his people, for the empire, for the world? As the caravan prepared to turn back, their mission complete, Zhong Qian gathered the men one last time. The fire was small, its smoke curling upward, carrying the scent of burning sage. "We've opened a path," he said, his voice steady as the steps. "The silk will travel where we cannot, binding east to west. But the road is not finished. It will grow, and others will walk it." His words hung in the air, a prophecy of a world transformed. Li Wei, sitting cross-legged, felt the weight of their journey settle into something larger, a legacy that would echo through generations, in markets, stories, and the shimmer of silk. But the return journey loomed, and with it, the Xiongnu's shadow. Scouts reported fresh tracks, closer now, their intent clear. The silk, a beacon of hope, was also a lure for danger. Li Wei, his hand on his knife, looked eastward toward home, and wondered if they would survive to see it. The Silk Road had changed the world, but at what cost? Its legacy was a tapestry still being woven, its final threads waiting to be spun. The caravan stood at the edge of Bactria, poised to begin the long journey back to Chong'an. The steppes stretched before them, a sea of grass under a sky heavy with the promise of autumn rain, its air sharp with the scent of damp earth and wild sage. Li Wei, his cloak tattered but his spirit unbroken, adjusted the strap of his sack, now lighter but for the pouch of roasted barley from May and the jade amulet from his mother. The silk, much of it traded for Bactrian horses, jade, and promises of alliance, had left its mark, a shimmering thread that had begun to weave the world together. As the camels snorted and the men tightened their belts against the chill, Li Wei felt the weight of their journey settle into a quiet clarity. The Silk Road, born from their steps, was no longer just a path. It was a living force, its echoes destined to ripple through time, touching even the world of today. The return journey was fraught with peril. The Xiongnu, relentless as the wind, struck at dawn 2 days out of Bactria. Their arrows whistled through the air, sharp as the cry of hawks, and the clash of swords rang like temple bells. Li Wei, gripping his small bronze knife, fought alongside Chen, whose bow sang with deadly precision. Zhong Qian, his face carved with resolve, led the defense, his sword flashing in the pale light. The battle was brief but brutal, leaving 2 men dead and a camel wounded, its blood staining the grass. The Xiongnu retreated, driven back by the caravan's ferocity, but their hoofprints lingered in the mud, a reminder that the Silk Road was as much a battlefield as a bridge. The air, thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of a hastily doused fire, carried the cost of their ambition. Yet even in this violence, the seeds of connection endured. The Bactrian horses, their manes flowing like rivers, carried the caravan swiftly through the steppes, their strength a testament to the alliances forged. Zhong Qian, nursing a shallow wound, spoke of the future as they camped one night under a sky blazing with stars. "The silk has spoken," he said, his voice low against the crackle of the fire, its cedar smoke curling upward. "Kings will seek it, and with it, our empire's name will travel." Li Wei, chewing a piece of maize barley, its nutty flavor now faint, felt the truth of those words. The silk had opened doors, but it was the stories, the shared meals, the fleeting friendships that would bind the world. The caravan's return to Chong'an was a quiet triumph. The city's walls rose like old friends, their stone warmed by a late autumn sun. The air was rich with the smells of home, roasted chestnuts from street vendors, the sweet tang of rice wine, the faint jasmine of the imperial gardens. Emperor Wudi received them in the great hall, his throne gleaming with lacquered wood and jade. The remaining silk, still soft as a lover's touch, was laid before him, alongside tales of Fergona's horses and Bactria's markets. The emperor's eyes, sharp as a falcon's, softened with approval. "You have woven a thread across the world," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. Li Wei, standing at the back, felt a swell of pride but also a quiet longing, for the valley, for May's songs, for the road that had changed him. The Silk Road's legacy lives on today, its threads woven into the fabric of our world. In modern markets, silk still shimmers, its softness a whisper of ancient craftsmanship. Visit a textile shop in Xi'an, once Chong'an, and you'll see bolts of silk dyed in colors that echo the pinks and golds of those ancient sunsets, their threads spun with the same care Li Wei's village once knew. The scent of mulberry leaves, faint but unmistakable, lingers in the air of rural workshops where silkworms are still raised, a craft guarded through centuries. The foods of the Silk Road endure as well. In a bustling restaurant in Istanbul or Samarkand, you might taste flatbreads dusted with sesame, their smoky flavor a cousin to those Li Wei ate at the Jade Gate. Kebabs seasoned with cumin and chili, their sizzle filling the air, carry the memory of Urshi's feasts. Even the wine, tart and bold, served in clay cups in Tashkent, echoes the grape juice that warmed Li Wei's chest in Bactria. These flavors, passed down through generations, are the Silk Road's quiet legacy, a testament to the meetings of cultures that began with a caravan's steps. Architecture, too, bears the road's mark. In Xi'an's ancient mosques, built by traders who followed the Silk Road, domes rise like those in Bactria, their tiles glinting with patterns of vines and stars, reminiscent of the Sogdian robes Li Wei admired. The music of the guqin, its silk strings humming, blends with the lutes and drums of Central Asia in modern ensembles, their melodies a bridge across time. Even language carries the echo. Words like silk and saffron have traveled as far as the goods themselves, woven into English, Persian, and Arabic, their sounds a faint trace of Zhong Qian's mission. Li Wei, now an old man in his village, told these stories to his grandchildren. his voice soft as the silk he once carried. He spoke of the desert's heat, the mountain's cold, the taste of yogurt in Urshi, and the fear of Xiongnu arrows. His amulet, worn smooth by years, hung around his neck, its lotus carving a reminder of home. The Silk Road had changed him, and through him, the world. He died quietly, under a sky much like the one he'd seen in Fergana, the air scented with jasmine and memory. As you lie in bed tonight, imagine the rustle of silk, the clink of a trader's coins, the laughter around a fire in a distant valley. The Silk Road is not gone. It lives in the markets you visit, the spices in your kitchen, the stories you tell. Li Wei's journey, Zhong Qian's dream, the caravan steps, they are with you, in the fabric of the world, whispering of a time when a single thread bound east to west. Close your eyes, and you are there, walking the road, its dust on your skin, its promise in your heart. And so, the story ends, but the Silk Road lives on, a legacy woven into the tapestry of today.